Jack and the Beanstalk. In this cottage, a little boy called Jack lived with his mother. They didn't have very much money, and sometimes not enough to eat. All they had was a cow called Flossie. Jack's mother said Flossie would have to be sold so they could buy food. Off Jack went to market. His mother cried as she waved him goodbye because she loved Flossie very much. On his way, Jack began to think of all the money he could get for his cow. Naturally, Flossie wasn't very happy about the whole business. As Jack walked through the countryside, he saw a strange old man coming towards him. The man said he was looking for a cow just like Flossie, and he'd like to buy her. "But," said the strange old man, "don't sell her for money. I will give you these magic beans for her." So Jack took the beans and ran home to his mother. Flossie went along with the strange old man. Jack's mother was furious. "Now," she said, "we have no money and no cow either. Oh, how could you be so stupid and take beans instead of money?" Jack said they were magic beans. "Whoever heard of magic beans?" said his mother. They are, shouted Jack. "This is all they're good for," shouted his mother as she threw them out of the window. Jack went to bed, very upset. Very upset indeed. Next morning, Jack got up and went to the window. He couldn't believe what he saw. An enormous beanstalk had grown from the beans that had been thrown out of the window. It was so big, it seemed to go right up into the clouds. Jack started to climb it to see how high it was. Up, up, up he went. It seemed to go on forever. When he reached the top, this is what he saw. An enormous castle. Jack knocked at the castle door. There was no answer, so in he went. There inside stood the tallest woman he had ever seen. She said she was the wife of the giant who lived in the castle and who liked to eat little boys for breakfast. "You'd better look out," said the giant's wife. "I can hear my husband coming." She put Jack in the huge oven so that he could hide. He peeped out to see what the giant looked like. "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman," the giant roared. "Has there been anyone here?" "No," said his wife. But the giant didn't believe her and became annoyed. He sat at a table and had 2 whole sheep for his supper. After he had eaten, he started to count his gold, and soon he was fast asleep. As he snored, the whole castle shook. Quietly, Jack climbed out of the oven. He climbed onto the table, took some of the gold, and ran away as fast as his legs could carry him. He threw the bag of gold down onto the ground, and down the beanstalk he went after it. At the bottom, his mother was waiting. She was glad to see him again, as she'd been worried about him. With the gold, they bought lots of things they needed and were very happy. Jack couldn't wait to climb the beanstalk again. This time it was different, as the giant was at home. Suddenly Jack heard a tremendous roar. "Fee-fi-fo-fum," shouted the giant. "I smell the blood of an Englishman." Jack dived into the oven to hide. "There's a small boy here," roared the giant. "There isn't any such thing," answered his wife. "Oh, why don't you play with the hen that lays the golden eggs?" "All right," said the giant, and sat down to watch the golden eggs being laid. Jack watched everything from his hiding place. Egg after egg fell into the basket, and then, just as before, the giant fell asleep. Jack showed his mother the golden eggs and the hen that laid them, and he told her that now they'd be rich. They both remembered it had all happened because of Flossie the cow and the old man that Jack had met and the beans he had given to him, and they laughed and laughed and laughed. But Jack couldn't stay away from that beanstalk and had to climb it just once more. When he arrived, the giant was asleep. In front of him was his magic harp, which played without anyone touching it. Jack thought how much his mother would like it. They'd be able to listen to music whenever they wished. He grabbed it, and away he went with the harp under his arm. But he didn't know that the harp could talk as well as play music. He hadn't gone far when the harp started to shout for help. Out came the giant, yelling at the top of his voice. "I'll have you for my dinner," he screamed. Down the beanstalk after Jack he came, nearer and nearer. Jack was terrified. He didn't want to be eaten up by the giant. At the bottom, Jack yelled to his mother. "Bring an axe! Quick! Quick!" he cried at the top of his voice. Then he started to chop at the beanstalk. The beanstalk began to topple, with the giant still holding on to it. Suddenly, down it crashed. The hole it made was so big, it could have reached to the other side of the world. Now, who knows what the end of this story will be? Yes, you're absolutely right. Jack and his mother moved to a lovely new cottage and lived happily ever after. Pied Piper of Hamelin. A very long, long time ago, in a town called Hamelin, which stood on the River Weser, a strange thing happened. This town of Hamlin was overrun by rats. There were thousands of them. There were so many that people just didn't know what to do, because the rats fought the dogs, killed the cats, licked the babies in their cradles, drank the soup out of great big ladles, split open casks of salted sprats, made their nests in men's Sunday hats, even spoiled the women's chats. It was really terrible, and no one knew what to do about it. One day, a crowd went to the town hall to see the mayor and corporation, to ask them to do something about these awful pests. They said if he didn't do something quickly, they would throw him out. The mayor became very worried and upset, because he didn't know what to do either. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. In came the strangest man they had ever seen. His suit was half yellow and half red. He was tall and thin with blue eyes and a mouth that seemed always to be smiling. He told the mayor and corporation he could help them get rid of the rats. He told them how he could make anything that crawled or flew or walked follow him if he wished. He said his name was the Pied Piper. He had a yellow scarf around his neck, and at the end of it he kept his pipe. He said he could get rid of the awful rats, but it would cost them 1,000 gold coins if he succeeded. The mayor said, "If you can do this, I will give you not 1,000, but 50,000. Anything you wish." The piper stepped into the street, put the pipe to his lips and started to play, the rats dancing after him. They came to the River Weser. And into the river fell the rats, hundreds and hundreds of them. And they were all drowned. But not quite all. One swam across to the other side. It ran back to Ratland to tell what had happened, to tell how all the rats had drowned, except for him. Back in the town, the people were so happy the rats had gone that they rang the bell so hard that they almost knocked down the steeple. The mayor told the people to get long poles, clear out the nests and block up the holes so that never again would there be rats in the town. In the marketplace, the Pied Piper suddenly appeared and asked the mayor to pay him the 1,000 gold coins he had promised.
"No," said the mayor. "Do you think I would be so stupid as to pay such a large sum of money to a man dressed in such silly clothes? You can't do anything about it anyway. All the rats have been drowned and can't come back. But I don't want to be unfair, so I will pay you 50 gold coins instead of the 1,000.
The Pied Piper became very angry, as indeed he should, because a promise had been broken. He told the mayor he was dishonest and he would punish him for it.
"Do your worst,"
shouted the mayor. Into the streets again stepped the Pied Piper. He sounded 3 notes on his pipe. Suddenly, there was a rustling, a sound as if crowds were bustling. Small feet pattering, wooden shoes clattering, little hands clapping, little tongues chattering. Out of the houses the children came running. Little boys and little girls with rosy cheeks and golden curls. Eyes were sparkling, teeth like pearls. Tripping and skipping ran merrily after the Pied Piper with shouts and laughter. The mayor and corporation could not believe their eyes. They could hardly move. All they could do was watch their children following the sounds of the pipe. They became very frightened as the piper turned towards the river. They remembered what had happened to the rats. But suddenly, the piper turned towards the mountain.
It's too high! He'll never get over the top!
Shouted the mayor. When they reached the mountainside, a huge doorway opened, and in went the children. Then, with a tremendous bang, the doorway shut tight behind them. But not all of them. One little boy was lame and couldn't keep up. He returned sadly to the town, but there were no longer any other children to play with. When the grown-ups asked him why he had followed the piper, he said that the piper's tune had said that inside the mountain there was a wonderful place where children could play and sing and dance. A place that was magical, and where children could have anything their hearts desired. They looked everywhere for the Pied Piper. They said they would pay him all the gold and silver in the town if he would only bring the children back. But it was too late. The children had gone forever. On the great church window in the city of Hamelin, they painted the story of how their children were stolen away, and it stands there to this very day. The Emperor. In a peaceful country, far, far away, there lived an emperor who liked nothing better than new clothes. Everybody was very annoyed about this because he was spending all the money the townspeople paid in taxes, and he did not pay those to whom he owed money. He hardly paid any of his bills at all. He didn't bother to pay the soldiers in his army. He didn't bother about anything except new clothes for himself. While the soldiers marched up and down, and the townspeople became more and more angry, the emperor would stay in his room and change his clothes 6 or 7 times a day. In fact, everybody was very unhappy indeed, except the emperor. One day, 2 weavers arrived in town. Weavers are people who make cloth, but these 2 weren't real weavers. They just wanted to make some money without doing any work. So they told everyone that the cloth they made was the finest in the world, but that only those who were very clever could see it. Those who hadn't any brains couldn't see the cloth at all. It wasn't very long before the emperor heard about the weavers and asked to see them. He told the weavers they must make him some new clothes. The weavers said this would cost a lot of money, as their cloth had to be made from the finest silk and the purest gold thread.
"Oh, that's all right," the emperor told them. "You will be paid well for your work."
The emperor called for his Lord Chamberlain and told him to find room for his weavers to work, and to give them as much silk and gold thread as they wanted. The Lord Chamberlain did not trust the 2 weavers, but he had to do as the emperor told him. Eventually, he brought the weavers everything they asked for. They told the Chamberlain to go away so they could get on with their work. When the Lord Chamberlain left, the weavers laughed themselves silly. They bundled the beautiful, priceless pieces of thread into their bags and pretended to work all night making the clothes. One day, the emperor wondered whether his new suit was ready or not, but he was worried in case he wasn't clever enough to see the cloth. So he sent the Lord Chamberlain instead. The weavers were ready for him, and one of them pretended to hold up a piece of cloth for him to see. Of course, there was nothing there at all.
"Marvellous,"
said the Lord Chamberlain. He dared not admit he couldn't see anything, otherwise they would think he was foolish.
"Absolutely marvellous. We want some more silver and gold thread,"
said the weavers. The emperor asked how things were coming along, and was told the cloth was magnificent.
"Then give them more thread,"
commanded the emperor. Next day, he sent someone to see when the suit would be finished. The weavers again held up nothing, and the messenger from the emperor had to say how wonderful the cloth was, as he didn't want them to think he had no brains either. He went back to the emperor and told him the clothes would be ready in about a week.
"Then," said the emperor, "next week I shall leave my court through the tower wearing the most beautiful suit in the world."
He thought that if 2 members of his court had seen the cloth, and they didn't have as many brains as he had, then he would surely be able to see it. and so he stopped worrying about it. The big day arrived. The suit was ready to be collected from the weavers. The emperor went to the weavers himself, and they pretended to show him the suit, which of course was not there at all. He couldn't say he was unable to see anything, 'cause the whole town would have thought he had no brains. So he told them how marvellous the suit looked. Not long after this, the weavers arrived at the palace with a pile of boxes. Opening them, they again showed the emperor his wonderful suit, which was not there at all. They showed him his trousers, which were not there at all. They showed him a scarf, which was not there at all. His coat, which was not there at all. And they told him that the suit was so light he would hardly feel he was wearing it. They asked the emperor to undress so that they could put his suit on. The emperor stood in the middle of the room with practically nothing on. The weavers made themselves busy pretending to dress him. The Lord Chamberlain came in to say that the procession was ready, and everyone in the town was waiting to see him in his new clothes. The emperor asked the Lord Chamberlain how he liked the suit. Magnificent, sir, he said, not wanting the emperor to think that he had no brains. As the emperor went out of the front door of his palace, the two tricky weavers left by the back with all the beautiful cloth they had stolen. The emperor arrived in the town square. "Look at his beautiful cloak," the people cried, wishing to show they had brains and could see it. "Look at his wonderful suit," they all shouted. Not one of them was brave enough to say they couldn't see anything, except one little boy who shouted at the top of his voice and shrieked with laughter, "The emperor has no clothes on! The emperor has no clothes on!" There was a hush, then a whisper, and the whisper became louder and louder until it reached a roar. "Look, he hasn't any clothes! Look, he's practically naked!" everyone roared. The emperor was so ashamed, he ran back to the palace and stayed there for weeks and weeks, not daring to put his face outside. One day, he realized just how stupid he had been. He gave away all his beautiful clothes to the poor, and from that day he ruled over his kingdom wisely, as all emperors should. And all because a little boy in the crowd told the truth. Puss in Boots. There was once a miller who lived in a windmill. He had 3 sons, and they were all very poor. When the miller died, he left to his eldest son the windmill. To his second son he left his donkey. And to his youngest son he left his cat. This young man was not very pleased at all. "What can I do with a stupid cat?" he said to himself. "How can a cat help me to make my way in the world?" One day he set off with his cat to make his fortune. He walked for miles and miles and became so tired he had to rest. Sitting down on a large stone by the roadside, he heard a voice saying, "Just give me a sack and a pair of boots, and all your worries will be over." It was the cat who was talking. The young man thought, "How silly, cats can't talk, and anyway, how on earth can a cat help me?" But he gave him the boots and the sack. The next day, without his master knowing, the cat set off through the long grass, dressed in his bright new boots with his sack. And he came to a place where he knew there were hundreds of rabbits. He put some food in his sack and settled down to wait. After a little while, a rabbit came along and started to eat the food in the sack. In a flash, the rabbit was tied up and in the sack, and Puss set off for the king's palace, which stood on a hill. He was shown into the throne room, and he told the king that he had brought him a present of a fine young rabbit. "It's from my master, the Duke," the cat told the king. The king asked Puss all about the Duke, who we all know was the miller's youngest son. But the king believed all the stories Puss was telling him. That night, Puss returned home, but didn't tell his master what he'd been up to. Next morning, he returned to the place where he'd captured the rabbit. He put some food in the sack and waited for 2 partridges to come along. The same thing happened. The birds were caught, and off to the king's palace he went. The king was even more pleased, and said how wonderful his master the Duke must be to send him all these presents. In the days that followed, Puss brought present after present to the king, and told him that they were all from his master the Duke. The cat became a great favourite, and was even introduced to the king's daughter, who of course was a princess. One day the king and the princess were riding in their carriage. This was the moment Puss had been waiting for. Running to his master, he told him to go for a swim. His master said he didn't feel like swimming right then. "But you must, quickly!" cried his cat, pushing him towards the river. Into the river the young man went, and when he was in the middle of the water, Puss picked up his master's clothes and hid them in the bushes. Leaving his master in the river, Puss ran to stop the king's coach. "The Duke is drowning!" shouted Puss at the top of his voice.
"Oh, we must save him!" cried the king. "Save the Duke! Save the Duke!"
Within seconds, the king's guards were at the water's edge. The miller's son didn't know what was going on. He was freezing in the cold water, and realizing he had no clothes on, he was very embarrassed. "His clothes have been stolen," Puss told the king. Returning to one of his guards, the king told him to ride back to the palace and bring the finest suit he could find. Back came the guard, and the young man put on the beautiful suit. Oh, how noble he looked! The king told him how much he had heard about him, and that he would like him to come for a ride in the royal coach. The miller's son was surprised at being called a duke. Remember, he didn't know what Puss had been saying. But a sly wink from Puss stopped him from giving the game away. The young man enjoyed the coach ride, particularly as it was with the most beautiful princess he had ever seen. She thought he was the most handsome duke she had ever seen. Meanwhile, Puss, who had no time for coach rides, was planning what he would do next. Running ahead of the coach, he came across some men working in a field. He told them that very soon the king would pass by, and if he asked them who owned the fields, they must say they belonged to the duke. Puss told them if they didn't do this, he would see that the king put them in prison for years and years. The coach came by. The king stopped the carriage and asked the men who owned the fields. "The Duke, sire," they said, because they didn't want to go to prison. "The Duke, eh? What a rich young man this Duke must be," thought the king. Puss, meanwhile, had reached the castle of the wicked giant. It was the giant who actually owned all the land around, and he was a bad and cruel giant. Puss walked straight up to him and told the giant he had heard that he was one of the cleverest giants in the world, so clever that he could change himself into anything he wished.
"Yes, I can," yelled the giant. "Watch me change myself into a lion."
"That's very clever," said Puss, quite frightened by now. "But any old giant can change himself into a lion. What about something small, like a mouse?" Before you could wink your left eye, the giant had turned into a mouse. Too late, the giant realized what he'd done and what a mistake he had made. Puss pounced, and in a flash had eaten him all up. When the coach arrived at the castle, Puss met it and said, "Welcome to the castle of my master, the Duke." Puss winked at his master, which told him not to say anything. When they entered the castle, they couldn't believe their eyes. They thought it was the most magnificent castle they had ever seen.
"What a splendid young man this Duke is," thought the king.
Soon they all returned to the king's palace, where a magnificent banquet was given for the miller's son, who everyone now called the Duke. The king stood up and announced that the Duke and his daughter, the princess, were going to be married. The happy couple went to live in the giant's castle, which of course now belonged to the Duke, and there they lived happily ever after. But what about Puss in Boots, who brought all this about? Well, he went to live with the Duke and Princess in their castle. He wore only the finest boots and had at least 100 pairs. Dick Whittington. In this village, a long time ago, lived a boy who had no mother or father. His name was Dick Whittington. He had no other children to play with, and every day all he could do was listen to the grown-ups talking about the wonderful places they had seen. They used to talk about London, which they said was one of the most beautiful cities they'd been to. They told Dick the streets of London were paved with gold. Dick kept on thinking about how streets would look paved with gold. He really couldn't imagine what they would be like. He could not get these thoughts out of his mind, and he decided that he would go there, no matter how long it took him. So one day, he wrapped up the few things he possessed, tied the bundle to a stick, and set off for the big city. And what a long way it was! The road seemed to go on forever. But every time his feet hurt, he kept thinking about those golden streets. Many days passed, and then he saw in front of him the fabulous city of London. He ran, shouting, "I've arrived! I've arrived! Soon I will see the streets of gold!" But he didn't find the golden streets. Instead, he found that they were made of stone. In tears, he sat down outside a house. It was Mr. Fitzwarren's house. The door opened, and out came the cook, who shouted at Dick to go away. She was very angry, and was about to beat him, when Mr. Fitzwarren came out of the house. With him was his beautiful daughter, Alice. "Take him to the kitchen and give him something to eat," said Mr. Fitzwarren. "And if he wants to stay, let him." Dick was given a huge meal, and he decided he would like to stay at the house. Dick would have been very happy if it hadn't been for one thing. The cook didn't like him. She kept him working from early in the morning till late at night. If anything went wrong, she would beat him. Dick had an awful time. He slept in the attic in a little bed. When he tried to sleep, he was kept awake by mice. All night long the mice would scamper and squeak and jump in his bed. The mice were such a nuisance that he decided to spend all his money, which was exactly 1 penny, on a cat. One morning he set out to buy a cat which would catch the mice. Dick loved his cat very much indeed and gave him lots of milk to drink. Soon, of course, there were no mice left. One day, Mr. Fitzwarren told Dick he was sailing away to another country. He asked Dick if there was anything he could buy for him. "I haven't any money," Dick said. But he told Mr. Fitzwarren he could take his cat, which would keep the ship free from mice. "That's the last you'll see of your cat," snarled the cook. Dick was very sad when his cat left, so Mr. Fitzwarren's daughter gave him some money to buy another one. The cook became meaner and meaner. Soon Dick could stand it no longer and decided to run away from London and never go back. Again, he wrapped up all he had and set off through the snow. He really didn't know where to go or what to do. Suddenly, he heard the chiming of bells. He listened and listened. They seemed to be saying, "Turn again, Dick Whittington, turn again. One day you will be Lord Mayor of London." I believe you, great bells, cried Dick, and turned back as the bells had told him, back to Mr. Fitzwarren's house and the horrible cook. The cook treated him worse than ever, but Dick didn't care. He kept thinking of what the bells had told him, that one day he would be Lord Mayor of London. Far, far away, Mr. Fitzwarren's ship came to the harbour of a strange land. The crew came ashore, bringing with them all the things they'd brought to sell. They all set off for a strange town far away from their ship. It was hot. They walked for miles and miles. At last, they arrived. "Here we are," said Mr. Fitzwarren. "Let's go and sell our goods." He marched through the little winding streets at the head of his sailors and soon came to the king's palace. The guards looked very stern. The king didn't want to buy the things Mr. Fitzwarren and his men had brought, but he said he would give anything if someone could rid his country of the mice that were everywhere. Mr. Fitzwarren ran out of the palace, through the city, across the desert, back to his ship, and then, puffing and panting, ran all the way back to the palace again. He held out a sack to the king, saying, "Great king, in this sack is the end to your problem." And out jumped Dick Whittington's cat. In a few days, there were no mice left. The king told Mr. Fitzwarren that if he would leave the cat, he could have half the king's treasure. Mr. Fitzwarren agreed. And so he sailed for home. One day he arrived back in London. He stood in front of his big house with his daughter by his side. He asked all his servants to come to him, and then he told Dick that half of the king's treasure was his, because if it hadn't been for the cat he had given him, nothing like this would have happened. So Dick became rich. He bought new clothes. He bought presents for all the servants. Yes, even for the cook, who was so amazed at Dick's kindness that she smiled, whistled, and sang. From that day on, she was a different person. Alice, Mr. Fitzwarren's daughter, who liked Dick very much, agreed to marry him. Years passed by, and the message of the great bells came true. Dick, one day, became the Lord Mayor of London. When he was famous, he often thought of his cat and wondered where it was. Dick's cat was living in great comfort in a beautiful palace at the other side of the world. Perhaps he knew that without him, this story could never have been told. There was once a city of beautiful buildings, and in it there lived a little boy whose name was Aladdin. Nearly every day he played in the marketplace. One day, a very clever magician came to town. He was clever, but sadly, he was also a very bad man. He entertained Aladdin with his magic, and Aladdin thought what fun it was to have a magician as a friend. The magician gave Aladdin a piece of gold and told him to take it home to his mother. The people in the streets seemed to know something strange was happening. Aladdin arrived home, told his mother about the magician, and gave her the piece of gold. With it, they were able to buy all kinds of wonderful things. One day, the wicked magician arrived with lots of presents. Aladdin's mother thought how nice the magician was, and agreed that he could take Aladdin on a long journey, a journey which would make them rich for the rest of their lives.
"Hurry, hurry," shouted the magician. "It will soon be dark."
Mile after mile they walked, and Aladdin became very tired. He looked back at the city and was a little sorry he'd agreed to go on such a long journey. He wished he were back with his mother. "How much longer?" asked Aladdin. "How much farther do we have to walk?" He started to become a little afraid. The trees seemed to be closing in. He imagined they had arms, legs, and strange faces.
"Hurry," shouted the magician, "or there will be trouble for you."
Suddenly, they came to a clearing. The magician began to speak magic words. There was a flash of lightning, and flames sprang up from the ground. Through the flames came a great white smoke, which surrounded the magician. When the smoke cleared, Aladdin saw a huge stone slab.
"Help me move it," said the magician.
"I am helping," Aladdin said as he pulled at the magician's cloak.
"You stupid boy! Pull! Pull!" yelled the magician.
Suddenly, the slab of stone came away, and below there was a long flight of stairs leading to a cave.
"Go down," said the magician, "and help yourself to as many jewels as you can carry. But bring me an old lamp which you will find hanging on the wall."
The magician gave Aladdin a magic ring to keep him safe. In the cave, Aladdin found jars and jars, all filled with jewels and precious stones.
"Come on, come on!" the magician shouted down to Aladdin.
Aladdin found the funny-looking lamp the magician wanted, and after filling his pockets, he climbed back up the stairs. He didn't understand why the magician wanted the lamp, so he told him that he'd forgotten to bring it.
"Then you stay where you are!" shouted the magician,
and he slammed the huge slab of stone down upon Aladdin. Aladdin didn't know what to do. How was he to get out? He remembered the ring, and he tried to get it off his finger. He rubbed it, and an enormous man appeared. He told Aladdin that he was the slave of the ring, and would do anything Aladdin asked. "Oh, please, get me out of here," said Aladdin. The huge stone immediately flew into the air. Out came Aladdin. His mother was so glad to see him. She decided to polish the dirty old lamp Aladdin had brought from the cave. Suddenly, another huge man appeared. He told them he was the slave of the lamp and would do anything that they asked. So, as they were very hungry, they asked for something to eat. Because the lamp would do anything they asked, they became richer and richer and had everything they wanted. The years went by, and Aladdin grew up to be a fine young man. He lived in a wonderful palace, from which he often used to see the princess. He wondered if one day he would marry her. He often thought about the days when he was a little boy and found the lamp which made him rich, and he wondered about the wicked magician and where he was now. Aladdin decided to visit the king's palace to ask if he could marry his daughter. The king thought he was a fine young man and agreed that he should become his son-in-law and marry the princess. One day, Aladdin was away with the army. The princess was in her garden. She heard a voice crying out, "New lamps for old, new lamps for old." It was the wicked magician in disguise, so that no one would know him. The princess thought how glad Aladdin would be to have a new lamp for his old one. She didn't know what the old one could do, and that the slave of the lamp would do anything that Aladdin asked, so she changed it. The magician rubbed the lamp, and the slave appeared. The magician commanded that Aladdin's palace and all that was in it should be taken far away to the desert. "And see that I have a room there too," said the magician to the slave. The ground started to shake, and the palace rose into the air with the princess inside it. The evil magician flew after it. Miles away and hours later, it came down in the middle of the desert. Very soon, the king became worried about his daughter, the princess. He sent his soldiers to find Aladdin immediately. The king told Aladdin all that had happened, and Aladdin set out immediately to find his princess. He searched the entire kingdom, but to no avail. Aladdin was almost ready to give up when he remembered the ring. "Take me to my princess," Aladdin asked the slave of the ring, and before you could wink your eye, Aladdin was back at his palace. He took the magician by surprise, and after a long fight, he defeated him. Looking around, Aladdin suddenly saw his princess with the magic lamp. The slave appeared, and they asked that everything be returned to the way it was before. The palace flew back, the wretched magician was no more, and Aladdin and his princess were together again. The king was absolutely delighted, and a huge party was given. Everyone in the town was invited. And what do you think happened next? Yes, they lived happily ever after.